I'm from Mattituck-Laurel Library, and thank you for joining us this evening on behalf of Mattituck, as well as all of the North Fork libraries who joined together to make this possible today. Thanks for joining us. As a reminder, we are going to mute everybody once Marian begins her program. And if you have an urgent question, you may go ahead and put it in the chat, and we will go ahead and find an appropriate time to ask that, or otherwise we may save the questions to the end. All right, so let me read her little bio that I had here. Where'd it go? There we go. So Marian Lindberg is the author of 2 nonfiction books: the newly released Scandal on Plum Island, which is what we're talking about tonight, A Commander Becomes the Accused. The End of the Rainy Season is another of her books, Discovering My Family, Hidden Past in Brazil. She began her career as a newspaper reporter in Buffalo, New York, and that led her to law school. She clerked for the Honorable Harold H. Green in Washington, D.C., and practiced law there and in New York City, representing clients as varied as journalists, publishers, a man on death row, and small businesses. In 2005, Lindberg joined the Nature Conservancy, where she handles land protection transactions, and she made a lot of friends there, I believe. So thank you for joining us tonight, Marian. We've converted her for the summer to a North Forker. She's coming to us from Cutchogue tonight, and thank you so much for sharing all that that you do. All right, that's my dog.
Not my dog.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So I will. You can go ahead and start sharing your screen if you want to, Marian, and I'm going to mute myself so that you don't have to hear my dog.
All right. Well, first, let me say hello and thanks to everybody for sharing this.
I just.
Did you mute me? No.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. We can hear Marian now, right?
Okay. All right. Good. All right. I was just saying hello to everyone and thank you very much for joining us. Yes, it is a real North Fork summer and a real Plum Island summer for me. Tomorrow, there's a congressional briefing being held via Zoom where I, a colleague from the Nature Conservancy, and 2 people from Save the Sound will be briefing staff members in the Senate and the House, telling them all the wonderful things that Plum Island is and has and could be, to try to persuade them to get their bosses to repeal the law that requires the sale of the island. We have a wonderful vision that's going to be rolled out next week that would allow everybody to visit Plum Island eventually, limited public access, and along with nature preserve areas and guided hikes and research. Research facility would be reused. One of the small buildings of Fort Terry could be refurbished into a small dorm for the many researchers who are clamoring to get access to the island. So this is all going to start tomorrow. And I feel like the book is sort of timely. The book is about the past on Plum Island. It's about a little known story, and I'm actually got a slide about it tomorrow. Not that it's my book, but just the story, because it's pretty significant. 1914, the federal government really was just beginning to target perceived homosexuals as a matter of policy. First, it was the Immigration Bureau, and that only started around 1910. And this trial of Major Keeler on Plum Island in early 1914 was extremely early, maybe the first trial of a senior officer located in the domestic United States, as opposed to fighting over in the Philippines, who was accused of homosexuality. So I'm going to show you some slides, and I'd like to read a couple of pages and answer any questions. But first, because this is the North Fork, I invited Amy Folk to join us. One of the questions I get asked a lot is, how did you find out about this? And why did you write about it? And I have to give Amy credit for how I found out about it. I was having a meeting, as Lynn said, I work for the Nature Conservancy, do a lot of land protection, which requires talking to a lot of people. I was preparing for a meeting in January of 2016, and a colleague handed me the book that the Southold Historical Society had published, A World Unto Itself, The Remarkable History of Plum Island. And my colleague said, there's even something in here about alleged homosexuality on the island. So I went home and read that chapter and was immediately intrigued. And at the time I was looking for my second book subject. This is the sort of thing I love, where it's a mystery, it's historic, it's legal. And I really wanted to, Amy is a historian and she had done a wonderful job with the history, and I really wanted to bring a lawyer's perspective to it. So I'd like to ask Amy to tell us how she found out about it, because the Army did a darn good job of squelching the story for a very long time.
All right, I've unmuted myself. Can everyone hear? I hope so. Okay. So about 7 years ago, the Southold Historical Society we used to have a really big book project that we would like to do, hidden histories within Southold. And Jeff Fleming, who was the director at the time period, and Ruth Ann Bramson and myself, we all agreed that we really, really wanted to find out more about Plum Island. We knew virtually nothing about it except some rumors. So we said, this is the perfect topic for us to look into. So we sat down and we thought about who was going to be doing what time period. One of the time periods I got was World War I and the founding of the forts. When I did that, I started looking at the history, and all of a sudden, all these articles in the newspapers would pop up about this man. And I was like, well, I'm doing the fort, I'm not doing this guy. But more and more articles popped up. So I was like, all right, I got to sit down and read about this man. And when I found out about him, I was like, this is the most amazing story I've ever heard of. It was amazing amount of drama. It was human interest. And I went to my other two authors and I said, I have to do this. I know we weren't planning on having a chapter on this man, but I have to do this. And that's how it happened. And after Marian read it, she came to me and she said, Amy, I really want to dig even deeper into this man. I was like, no, 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 he's mine. He's mine. And she's like, well, maybe I can work on him a little bit. I promise I'll be really gentle with him. And I was like, well, if you're going to be nice to him, because he's mine. I really want to take care of this guy. And Marian said, don't worry, I'll be good. And she was. She really dug even deeper than I could dig from Southold on what happened to him. Back to you, Marian.
Thank you.
Well, mine though.
he can be both of ours.
Yes.
But what I appreciate about Amy is that she really got into his perspective the way I tried to. And the thing about him is he left very scant record of his emotions. The sister who lived with him on Plum Island wrote some letters, and I first saw those thanks to Amy, and then made contact with the granddaughter, who's going to be on a Zoom with me in a couple of weeks. She lives in California, so we're doing one for California audience that'll be 8 o'clock Eastern time and 5 o'clock Western time, and more of the family members who lived under the shadow of this case because it was quite a dishonor. I don't want to do any spoilers. So it was a tough thing to grow up under, though. And I really am amazed that that she trusted me as much as she did. Over the course of 4 years, really never asked, to see anything. Of course, she had no right to, but I'm sure, she's an educated woman and probably knew that. But it doesn't always turn out well. Early in my legal career, I represented Jeffrey McDonald, the author. Some people might remember the book Fatal Vision, which was about also an Army, about a man who was convicted of killing his wife and children at Fort Bragg, I believe it was. And he entrusted his life story to an author who actually decided he was guilty. And then the subject sued him. So it doesn't always work out well. So thank you so much, Amy. And I am so glad that we were able to kind of work together on this. I mean, Amy helped me and read an early draft. etc. So I'm going to share my screen now because I want to just go over the present of Plum Island and lead you into the past. So everybody knows where Plum Island is. And as you can see, it is in a, I think I have a little pointer here. Yeah, you see the pointer. These islands look like they're in a straight line, right? The little Great Gull Island under the P, and where is it? My cursor's not really showing up. And Fisher's Island above the island. And the islands are in a straight line because they're connected by an underwater ridge, which was created by the retreat of the last ice sheet. And that underwater ridge extends all the way up to the mainland of New England. The island is quite beautiful. It has 25 different natural communities, according to New York Natural Heritage. And some of them are the best examples of those habitats in New York State and maybe beyond, but New York Natural Heritage just has the New York database. That freshwater marsh on the southeast portion of the island that you see right here is likely to convert to a tidal marsh as sea level rises over the next 60 years. Seals haul out, it's believed to be the largest seal haul out area in New York State in this rocky intertidal area up here, which is the northeast spit of land leading to East Point. There are buildings on Plum Island. Of course, nobody spends the night there unless they get waylaid by the weather, and they work hard to make sure that doesn't happen. This is the oldest building on the island, very iconic lighthouse, which needs some work. That black and white photo is what it looked like a long time ago, and you can see how much further from the shore it is. The newest building on the island is the Plum Island Animal Disease Center. This facility specializes in the study of foot and mouth disease, a vaccine. Several different vaccines have been created here. And it was just featured in last week's New Yorker as the place where a particular rabbit virus was confirmed. And this lab is a bio-level 3 lab. It is being replaced by a bio-level 4 lab in Kansas, which is scheduled to be fully operational by 2023. And that's why there is the opportunity to do something with this island and bypassed the normal procedures which would have required it to offer the island first to another federal agency, and if the no agency wanted it and had the money for it, then it would be offered to New York State. And there are low cost, no cost ways in which it could be conveyed to New York State. So that's what we're asking for, to have that normal process reinstated rather than selling it at auction to the highest bidder. So you're, I'm sure, all familiar with these views. This is what you see if you're on Cross Sound Ferry, and the lab on the bottom, the lighthouse on the top. But the lab actually started in a building on the east side of the island that you don't see from the ferry, and that is the famous building number 257. This building was completed in 1911. It was the torpedo and mine storage facility. At the time, torpedoes and mines were synonyms. There was a lot of underwater harbor mining had been done in Cuba, and of course the hostilities with Spain in the late 1800s were the reason that Congress authorized the construction of Fort Terry and a few other Eastern Long Island Sound forts. The Spanish-American War was over in 3 or 4 months, well before construction even started on the island, and they went ahead and built it, and they had a lot of drills for the mining. And so this building was built far away from the administrative center because of the dangerous materials. It's got several feet thick concrete walls. And they took this building in the early 1950s and refurbished it after Suffolk County unsuccessfully bid to turn the island into a park. The federal government just decided to keep it. And first it was the Army Chemical Corps that was going to use it, and then it was the Department of Agriculture. I found a newspaper clipping from 1954 when reporters were allowed to tour the spanking new lab facilities on the inside, and as the reporter so eloquently put it, no animal that arrives in the lab will ever leave again except as incinerated dust. So that chute that you see here that looks like a handicap accessible ramp was the cattle chute that was added late. So as I said, that was the storage facility built in 1911 when most of the Fort Terry buildings were completed. And here is an aerial photo that shows you where everything is located. All right, up here is the administrative center of the fort, one of the most intact examples of the Endicott and Taft approach to seacoast fortifications. Here is building 257 down here. The marsh is here. The harbor is here. The lab is over here. And a number of gun batteries are up here at East Point. This is where the SEALs haul out. And here again is what the lab, building 257 looked like. And it, of course, has been, a lot of rumors have been spun about Lab 257. In fact, there's a book by that name, and I'm not going to go into them here. So I love this set of pictures because you've got the same building then and now. And look how young the soldiers look. Soldiers would come from all over in the summer, set up tents on the parade ground and engage in drills. And some of the most colorful claims against Major Keeler arose during this July and August period, because that was one of the times when a senior officer, when the commander would mix with the average soldier. So it was a good opportunity either for something really to happen or for something made up to be fabricated. And if you look at the right-hand picture, this is when I had the good fortune to visit, and you can see how much the coast has moved, right? That is the same building, and the dune is right there now, which is kind of an interesting educational opportunity. There's so much to show people, really can chronicle American history through the lens of land use on Plum Island. This is the barracks, one of the barracks that still remains. Needs a little work. There's a hole in the roof right here that's got a plant growing out of it. DHS has not done much, if anything, to stabilize or maintain these buildings. New York State pointed that out in 2011, and to our knowledge, nothing has happened since, so that's really unfortunate. In its heyday, this is what Fort Terry looked like. 700 soldiers lived there permanently. Many others came, set up their tents, and this is right around the period when our guy arrived, Major Benjamin Keeler, one of 7 children to a very high-minded German family that lived in Western Iowa, in a very quirky town called Lamar's, which at the time of Ben's adolescence was run by British aristocrats. So he grew up with a lot of British tastes and mannerisms, including afternoon tea and not being a team sports kind of guy. He rode, played cricket, not baseball, and these oddities did not stand him in good stead when, as an unmarried man, he arrived at Fort Terry and rubbed some people the wrong way. And it was the beginning of the rise of gay subcultures in some of the big cities, and some people took advantage of that to create a certain picture of him. What you see here is him as a West Coast cadet. Then you see him in the Philippines, very gaunt, lousy food. He helped lead the Astra Battery of Mountain Artillery. Here he is, we believe, with his 2 brothers, although he looks quite different. He's filled out. Amy and I have a little disagreement about whether this is really him, but his great niece claims it is, and the more I look at it, the more I think it is him. We know this is Edgar, and we know this is Lewis, and there were the 3 Army brothers. And I think underneath your screens, you'll see him on this side. That's his sister, Sophia, who was also unmarried. They were very close because Ben helped take care of her after their father died. They were on the younger side of the 11 siblings. And then the mother died in the summer of 1911. So she came to live with Ben and act the way, like a hostess, the way a wife would have done. Ran the Sunday school, helped him entertain. But Major Keeler ran this man, had run-ins with this man, rubbed him the wrong way. This was Captain Philip Worcester. And Ben Keeler's older brother, Lewis, rubbed this man the wrong way. And nobody on this call is going to tell me who that is. If you would see, I would fall off my chair if anybody does. But you can see underneath here, if that, maybe you can see who the man on the right is. That's Theodore Roosevelt. And the man next to him, right here, is Leonard Wood. Leonard Wood was actually the commander of the Rough Riders, though Roosevelt gets most of the credit. He was a very good friend of Roosevelt, and he was a major figure in Washington and in the military for 40 or so years, and ran for president in 1920. And he had a vendetta against the Keeler family. So these two men did not make Major Keeler's life very easy at the end of 1913. And I don't want to give away the story, but here are a couple of the newspaper articles, a couple of many, many articles that Amy would have looked at. This is Major Keeler here, his lawyer from Boston, and one of his many officer supporters. He was also very popular with enlisted men. He was considered very fair. And believe it or not, that's one of the things that some of the junior officers did not like, because at the time, officers had free reign over their men. And Keeler was a little too fair, and sometimes he would take the side of an enlisted man against an officer. And not everybody liked that. This is a wonderful picture of the tents and these buildings in the back were the officers' quarters. My book opens with a party that was held on Halloween in 1913 in one of those houses. Major Keeler and his sister lived next door to the man who would become his chief accuser, claiming that he had groped him. So it's fantastic to actually see the scene. Now, this shows you how barren really the island was. A lot of it had been cleared, of course, for farming in the 1800s. And then the Army cleared a lot of additional trees, planted its maples that it lined the roads with. And you can see those officer homes in the, right here, Officers Row. This is, and some of the buildings that remain are up here. I think this was taken in 1924, but it's very much what it looked like 10 years earlier. This is what it looks like today, looking out east at Gardiner's Island, a view that Native Americans would have seen 1,000 years ago. Really so beautiful, has not changed. I guess there's less coast, that's about it. I think that's my last slide. Yeah, so I'll stop sharing. Okay, so I thought I would read from a different chapter than I've read from in the past, just a couple pages. It's called An Old Nemesis Returns. It's chapter 23. And I'll just give you a couple things you need to know to understand. I told you about Leonard Wood. He was the Army Chief of Staff. He had the vendetta against Ben's older brother. General Barry was the Chief General of the Eastern Department with headquarters on Governor's Island, another island that belonged to the federal government and has been saved by New York, and it's a wonderful place to visit. And then Mays, you'll hear Captain Mays, he was a captain and prosecutor who had been called in to question more witnesses after many people intervened on Ben's behalf, including some very famous people. William Jennings Bryan was a family friend. Because with so many brothers, many of them had gone on to have successful lives as business people and politicians in Nebraska. All right, so here we go. The dreaded publicity began on a Monday. It is reported that the General Court-Martial of Major Benjamin N. Keeler at Fort Terry, Plum Island next Tuesday afternoon will be one of the most sensational ever known in Army circles, wrote the Sun on February 23rd, 1914. Ben's trial had not started, but already it was attracting attention with 3 media magnets: New York location, high-ranking officer, and undisclosed, quote, immoral practices. The Sun characterized Ben as quote, a bachelor, an excellent disciplinarian, and very popular with the enlisted men at the fort, adding that his sister lives with him. The article stated that no details of the coming trial have been made public by government officials, yet quite a bit of Ben's personal history appeared, most of it accurate, including his service in the Astor Battery. The Sun's tone was decidedly pro-Keeler, contrary to Wood's prediction. Far from casting Ben as an autocratic officer, as he had written to the Secretary of Defense, the article's description of him as very popular with the enlisted men appeared near the top, and his troubles were blamed on a decision that irked officers, not enlisted men, the closing of the Officers Club. The Sun mentioned the possibility of a plot. Quote, days passed without the club being reopened. The officers keenly felt the loss of their favorite lounging place. A delegation waited on Major Keeler and pleaded with him to reopen the quarters, but without avail. From that time, it is alleged, the plot thickened. The article also portrayed the Army as unfair in its handling of Ben's leave, reporting that all his household goods were packed and labeled for Iowa. A big van was loaded and was ready to leave when a telegram was received, relieving Major Keeler of his command and placing him under arrest. With reporters being told little officially and banned from Plum Island, inaccuracies and exaggerations were bound to occur. The Sun article likely arose from conversations in New London over the weekend when soldiers on leave spoke off the record to the reporter. Toward the end of the story, an ominous statement appeared. It is also predicted that more than one officer at the fort will have to walk the plank before the affair is ended. Left unspecified was whether the plank walkers would be on the accuser's side or Ben's. The article closed by stating that on Tuesday, a special government transport would bring the members of the jury to Plum Island to be led by Colonel Henry Kirby of the 3rd Infantry. Known as the Old Guard, the 3rd Infantry was then and remains the oldest active duty regiment in the Army. Its motto well fit the case, noli me tangere, touch me not. The New York Times also reported on the case under the restrained headline, Army Board to try Major B.M. Keeler. Its story showed no sympathy for Ben and read like a press release from Wood, which in effect it may have been. Journalists could rely only on what people were telling them, and no one was telling them that Ben had already been arraigned nearly 2 weeks earlier. The pace at which the proceedings unfolded is stunning by today's standards. On February 11th, one day after Ben met with General Barry and Hahn on Governor's Island, he was back on Plum Island being formally charged with multiple counts of misconduct. Even Barry was kept in the dark. While he was telling Ben to undertake a 10-hour round trip to discuss resignation, the Army was sending officers from throughout the East Coast to Plum Island for Ben's arraignment. Further evidence that, at least as Army leaders were concerned, if not Garrison, he was the Secretary of War, the point of the Mays reinvestigation was always to sharpen the prosecution's case, not probe whether an injustice had been done. Ben might have thought things could not get much worse until he saw Lieutenant Colonel Delamere Scarrett walk into the small library room where the proceedings were being held. Years ago, Scarrett had criticized Ben for speaking his mind about deficiencies during a Fort Monroe target practice, leading to ill feelings. Here he was showing up to serve as a juror with the power to vote to dismiss Ben from the Army and send him to jail. Outside the steam-heated building, snow-covered Plum Island, a blizzard having struck a few days earlier. The island was not a place where anyone would want to be sent in the middle of winter, certainly not majors, lieutenant colonels, and colonels who lived as far away as Maine and Virginia, all high-level personnel, as the Times explained. The importance of the case may be judged from the personnel of the court, which includes the commanding officers of every important coast artillery fortification in this section of the United States, the commanding officer of Plattsburgh Barracks, and 2 of the artillery district commanders of the North Atlantic Coast Artillery Division. To have traveled such distances and arranged for coverage at their posts, these men required advance notice. It is likely that Wood chose the date of February 11th for the arraignment before May's report was even received, necessitating Wood's February 7th hurry-up order, so as not to disrupt the plans of so many top officers or have them arrive before the report's completion. Less than 3 weeks after Sophia had written that, quote, "We think the inspector is now convinced of Ben's innocence. Captain Mays stood on Plum Island, intent on proving the opposite." So I'll stop there. And before we open it up to questions, one thing I wanted to add is that there were really two rounds of research for me. First was trying to get my arms around the case. I was able to make some pretty interesting legal findings through records at the National Archives, which is just amazing. That institution is really a national treasure. And once I understood the case, or thought I did, and made repeated readings of the transcript and did the bio on the problems between Leonard Wood and Lewis Keeler and how that affected the case, then I realized I needed to do much more research into the social context, because this was so early in terms of federal action against targeting an alleged homosexual. I wanted to know more about just how did that concern arise and what had happened before then. And that was a whole new set of books and writers and a lot of academics. And it's really been relevant because I see that the mask wars are really wars over masculinity, and whether it's tough or weak to wear a mask. And it shouldn't be about that, right? It should be about, is it smart? Is it effective? Is it considerate? But this was a period, this 1890 to 1920 period was so fascinating in terms of the rise of masculinity and a lot of the concerns with manliness. And you see that echoing today. And it's been really interesting to see how much of that period does echo. So anyway, I just thought I'd give you that as context. And if there are any questions for either me or Amy, we'd love to hear them.
You may unmute yourself if you want to. I did unmute everyone, but you'll need to do that to yourself as well if you have a question that you want to voice, or if you want to type it in the chat, I will share that. Well, I have a question about the effects on the sister and the rest of the family, how this whole scandal kind of, if you were able to find out, if there's anything that you were able to find out just through oral history from the family, or how that played out with them.
Well, I'll find out more because I'm doing a Zoom with the family in a couple of weeks in August. And I gather that there was just a question in the chat, what happened at the trial? I'm sort of holding that back because there's about 200 pages or 150 pages in the trial, and it was a complicated result. And I've been asked by other people not, these sorts of things, not to reveal, the spoilers. But it was very tough, I gather, on the siblings and their descendants. And the effect on the sister, I really think that both the sister and Ben really did not believe that anyone could believe these things about him, because they were really, what readers have said is that he's such a decent man. So Amy, we both agree with that, right? And readers do too. He's just a decent man. And the indecency of the nature of the charges, sometimes at these readings, I read some of the charges just so that you get an idea of what people are the outlandish things that people are saying he did. And what that indicates is people really didn't know about same-sex attraction. And they thought that such people were capable of the most fantastic, out of control kinds of actions. And gay friends of mine say, especially at this time period, anybody who had a mind, certainly an educated person who had a job and was trying to hold on to his job, would have done their utmost to keep any such tendencies completely undisclosed. And I don't believe that he even if he had any latent homosexuality, if that was the reason why he didn't marry, I don't even think he was aware of that. Certainly with 8 married brothers, he would have asked himself, how come I didn't marry? But he could have answered that. And he's very close to his sister, very close to his older sister as well, and to other family members, very capable of making male friends, had some very, very close male friendships. And this was quite encouraged in the military at the time. And he was devoted to duty, to rules, which is why he was sent to Plum Island, because people had gotten a little lazy in their peacetime post by the sea. He was sent there to restore discipline. So the great irony that the man the Army picked to send there and then promoted to an acting position of head of all of the Long Island East coastal forts should have been accused of these pretty outlandish acts.
We have another question that came in asking about your writing process, your publishing process, and how long you had to work on the project?
Well, I first heard about it in January of 2016, and the book came out in June of 2020. A lot of that is waiting, because that's what happens in publishing. But I like to draft in the morning. There was a writer who said, you go to bed at night and the well is empty and you just hope that it fills up overnight. And so I like the morning because the life hasn't gotten to you yet and nothing annoying has happened. You get up and you're kind of pure, right? You hope. And so, but editing I can do anytime. So I do have a day job. And so, you know, when I come home, I'm tired and I've been sitting in front of a computer often and don't really want to sit down and have the energy to draft something new. But editing, I enjoy, especially if it's on a piece of paper. And so I can do that in the evening. The hardest thing about writing is crossing out your own words. You know, you fall in love with your words, and they might be good, but they just, I had a writing class years ago. It was a novel writing class. And the first thing that the teacher had us do, she said, write down all the reasons that you read. So we did that. And then she said, write down all the reasons that you write. And you know, they're very different lists. There's, you know, you write to share ideas and express yourself. Well, most people read to be entertained and maybe to be shown some new information. But the one word that was on both lists was escape, to escape. So I've tried to keep that in mind. So I do try to, as a former journalist, I like fast-moving prose, but I also have my academic side. So this book is fast-moving. Nelson DeMille gave me, the author of the novel Plum Island, which is quite good, gave me a nice blurb. He said that it reads like a legal thriller, but I have 50 pages of endnotes. So that's where the support and, you know, the more academic discussion takes place, and people are free to ignore that or go there if they want to. But I'll say, you know, I like the writing questions. The most important thing that anybody ever said to me is when I was first starting out writing, seriously, you know, took a year off from work and moved out to my house in Wainscott a long time ago. And, you know, turned the hot water heater off after every shower because I was trying to make my savings last as long as they could. And I said, I wanted everything to be just so before I would write. And somebody said, well, is that the way you are about your, you know, when you go jogging? Everything has to be just so, the dishes have to be done and the house has to be neat. And no, of course not, you know, it's time to run. It's, you know, 7:38, I put on my shoes and I run. And that was the best advice that, you know, something like that, I was putting it up on this pedestal. And I think I'm at that point now where, you know, things are a mess and I just sit down and write.
So we had a few more questions that came in. Was he aware of the animosity that the authors had for him, or was there animosity building prior to this accusation, or did it just seem to jump when he made that decision to close the club?
That's a really good question. There's this one enigmatic figure, James Ward, a former sergeant, who they had been members of the same lodge, he and the commander. And he claimed he tried to warn the major, but the major said, oh no, he just told me he heard some people talking about me. So, every important character has a tragic flaw. Healer might have said, tell me a little bit more about what you heard. The other, he might have protected himself. Again, that goes back to this issue of he just didn't think it was conceivable that anyone would believe these things about him. There had been some issue with someone saying that leaving the post because he hassled them, and there was a completely different story about that too. That that the man who left had gotten a woman pregnant in Nebraska and was afraid that the major might tell people where he was. So, but yeah, I mean, were there inklings that he might have protected himself better? I think so. But I don't think he was aware of the extent of it.
And another question.
And I should add that it was, one group of people.
Right. So we're getting the feeling here, without being a spoiler, that it sounds like the accusations were false. Now, when it's a military action, does he have a defense, and why wasn't he better to defend himself? I will let you decide how you want to share to answer this question. We also have a question wanting to know how much longer it was before he passed away.
He did have the means to hire a private lawyer. And the courtroom scenes are pretty interesting because these were people shaped by their times, and the lawyer was no Clarence Darrow. I mean, this was 11 years before the first gay rights organization was even founded. It was founded in Chicago in 1925, because this is really about perception, and he was being perceived in a certain way. But to call out stereotypes and stereotypical thinking, and to challenge it was hard. And to call military men liars, especially the officers who were involved, was very hard. So the lawyer had a tough time. And there was also a military counsel, because it was customary for an Army person to be defended by a military counsel. And so that, I think one was a little better than the other. And the questions from the jurors are quite fascinating in terms of what they reveal. I think it's some of the most fascinating part of the case, what they reveal about their ideas. And it was quite a voyeuristic journey for some of them. So so it's yeah, I mean, I think the courtroom stuff is very interesting, just on its own. And people say that if you want to know about a society or a culture, read the transcript of a murder trial. Well, I think this tells you a bit about looking at American history through the lens of gender and sexuality, and what that was like in the early 1910s.
So did you think the trial changed views on masculinity and homosexuality? This is a question that came in by the military, because it was
they got more strict. Yeah, they got more strict. I think it made them very worried, because up until then, the cases in the military had primarily been in the Philippines. And there, it was easy to blame the quote unquote savage Filipinos, the animalistic Filipinos, for bad influence on Americans, just as the French were blamed in World War I for bad influence on Americans, on their morals. But here he was really one of them. He had been in the military for 17 years, West Point, risen very fast up the ranks early in his career, had wonderful credentials, very well respected. So the way in which they explain that to themselves is of interest, I think. And then after that, the last few chapters of the book do chart what happened afterwards to all the characters, and also in the area of the legal situation concerning military and non-military approaches to homosexuality. And, you know, in the military, it got a lot worse before it got better. Oh, when did he pass away? Late. He got to see 2 world wars that went on without him. I think it was about 1948, 1947. And in fact, MacArthur was the World War II MacArthur was the son of the general that he had served under in the Philippines. So these things must have been very difficult for him. But at some point, he had been out of the military more than he'd been in it, and he kept it very quiet. He did. Also an interesting part, I think.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Okay.
And my question is not that great. If it's a spoiler in the book, I'm just going to get the book and read it. But did this all stem from the fact that he closed the officers club? And was it reopened at the end, or what was the thing about the officers?
No, that's one of the many ways in which the press got it wrong.
Oh, I see. Okay.
But it's yeah. So you'll have to see how.
I'll read the book.
The various things that caused the animosity. And there was just a question. The first chapter is called Cross-Dressing for Halloween, and Worcester wore a dress at his party, and it's a very interesting question why he did that. Whether he was actually trying to, I don't think he was trying to make a point to Keeler. I think it was a reflection of how preoccupied young men were at the time with issues of sexuality. The so-called fairies were fairly prominent, especially in a place like New York City. And these men went into New York City, the officers, they would go to Governor's Island. Worcester had spent a lot of time there. And so they would see the men who dressed, they didn't completely cross-dress, but they would have feminine touches. They would wear a velvet scarf, some of them wore makeup, they called each other sisters, and they acted in sort of hyper-feminine ways. And this was very upsetting for a lot of men. And the book gets into how that's even linked to pushback against women's rights in the late 1800s. So I think it just reflects a preoccupation. But there are other possible explanations we can't know for sure, because several people did it, and they didn't all necessarily have the same reason for doing it at that party.
So I saw that they made that your book is also available in an electronic format, an ebook. Has there been any talk of making an audio version of it? Are you going to go in and do the voice?
I don't think it should be my voice. I can think of many better voices. There has been no talk of that. I think it would make a fantastic movie, but of course a lot of authors think their books would make great movies. But I think you have, the location, the remote island location. As people know, Plum Island figured in Silence of the Lambs. A friend of mine from my clerking days, his older brother's a screenwriter in LA, and my friend is sending him a copy of the book. And the one thing that the brother said to my friend is, Silence of the Lambs. I mean, he lives in California, he doesn't know anything about Plum Island, but that's a famous reference to the island. But I think with all the, it's because this is pre-World War I, and because it's a period of time that not that many people really know about after the Spanish-American War and before World War I. I think it could be a really great movie. You've got a strong female character in the sister. You've got the whole cross-dressing thing. He was in other places. It's not all taking place on Plum Island. There are a couple of chapters that people who read the book really liked in the Philippines. I mean, I learned so much about the reason why we were in the Philippines. And he was in San Francisco for a few years, so it touches down there. And we talk about some of the different attitudes in New York versus San Francisco. Yeah, and maybe Anthony Hopkins could be the, yeah, he could be a demented Leonard Wood, I think. he was one malicious guy. So what I liked about the historical research is that I was looking at famous people. I mean, even Susan B. Anthony is in the book because she was related by marriage to the family. And Theodore Roosevelt plays a couple of important roles, looking at famous people and famous events, but not for the reasons that made them famous. I was looking at them for the ways in which what they did, what happened, influenced this virtually unknown man. My cousin this weekend, she said, "Oh, this should be your promotional line. The major nobody's ever heard of who's at the center of everything." But Amy told me early on, Amy said, be sure you don't use today's sensibility to judge the historical events of 110 years ago. So I hope I wasn't guilty of that.
Yeah, that's the danger of what's going on today, unfortunately. So, all right, well, thank you very much. It was wonderful. And we did have a question asking about when you're going to talk with the family. Is that an open Zoom meeting or that's just a private thing that's happening?
Well, there's one that will be open to the public where the grandniece is going to participate. And that should be good because the executive director of the publisher is going to question both of us. And that's going to be next Tuesday. And I'm happy to share the Zoom link for that. That's next Tuesday. It's going to be 8 o'clock Eastern time, 5 o'clock Pacific time. And so that one is definitely open. The one that has a number of other family members, we decided to make that closed because I don't know that it would be interesting to people. They're going to share details that they have. Like there's a chair that somebody has that they think one of the characters sat in when he wrote a letter that's mentioned in the book. So
will you have that information up on your website, Marian?
Yeah, or people can just email me. It's easy. It's Marian@marianlindberg.com. That's how the Authors Guild sets up these websites for authors. So, and then I'll send, or I could send it to you, Lynn. And if
you want to send it to me, then I will have that, and anybody can just email the library reference at mattlibrary.org or give me a call at the reference desk.
Okay, and you can also get the book from the library, so you don't have to buy a copy in order to read it. Right?
Yes, I think almost all of us have it now. It may be checked out, actually, so you may have to wait a little bit for it. But yes, it is available. I know in Cutchogue, it's available in Mattituck, and I would certainly think that all of the North Fork libraries are making it available. And of course, you can purchase it at Burton's Bookstore in Greenport. All right, well, thank you very much. Anybody, Dawn, did you want to share anything, any upcoming events that you wanted to put a plug in for?
Actually, I just wanted to thank Marian, and it was terrific. This is the second time I've seen you, and it's just a wonderful talk. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate it. It's a fascinating place. It's a fascinating story. And thank you, Amy, for breaking it.
Well, I think it's an important lesson that we learned. You can't believe everything you read.
There are a lot of lessons. There really are.
A lot of lessons, yeah. And thank you, Amy Folk, our Southold Town historian, for joining us. If you have never heard any of her discussions before, she's a great speaker, and we want you back, Amy, for your next project.
I have to think of something. Don't make it too soon. I got to think of something.
Yes. Okay.
And A World Unto Itself is really a fantastic book.
Thank you. Yeah, your book too is wonderful as well. It really it adds so much to the knowledge of Plum Island, and that's really what a historical society wants. We want the truth out there. We want to add to what we know truthfully of what has happened in our area.
Well, thank you for saying that, because that was one of my early motivations, was that this is one more compelling reason
Yeah.
why the island is significant, unique, and deserving of some protection. And, you know, there are so many curatorial possibilities for the island. You really, and now to add this, and yet I didn't want to be the one. I said to our communications director, you have to make a decision whether this should become part of what we say about the island. And I think that decision has been made, so I'm happy.
I think Keeler's story is very significant nationally as well as locally.
Definitely.
And I think it should be definitely part of the island.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
do too.
yeah.
All right, well, thank you everyone for joining us this evening. And I will be happy to share that information about the discussion with the family. So just go ahead and email me or give me a call at the library. Thank you so much, Marian.
All right, thank
for
you
joining us
everyone.
this evening.
Really enjoyed it. Thanks for your questions.
Bye.
Okay, bye everyone.
Bye.